Hi, thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of In the Study. Each week we try to bring you into the pastor's study and get you to think about what we're going to be talking about on Sunday morning. The goal is that we might pique your interest in the subject for Sunday, that we might kind of prep you for the passage so that you might pre-study it. And finally, that we might prod you as a result of that to tuning in on Sunday morning. So three reasons we do in the study. The first, of course, is to pique your interest. The second is to prepare your hearts. And the third is to prod you to join us on Sunday mornings as we go through a particular passage of Scripture. Now, I've changed my mind from what I originally was going to be teaching this Sunday. I've changed it to the church. The topic is the church. 2 months ago, about right now, we made a decision as a church as a result of the governor's orders not to assemble together. And we began live streaming, and I want to be so thankful and so grateful for all the people, especially Peter, that has worked diligently and tirelessly to get our church up and streaming. It was a big endeavor, and he did it, and we're so grateful for that. But one of the things that I think that I've experienced and you've experienced as a result of having to stream every Sunday is that we miss each other. There's something about the church when it gets together, when it assembles together, there's a dynamic that takes place that Zoom won't replace. So, as I thought about that, and as I've talked to many of you all, you're eager to get back. And the reason is because we miss doing church. And I will tell you that online streaming and doing church is an oxymoron. In other words, church online is an oxymoron. The church was meant to be together. So I want you to spend some time in Matthew the 16th chapter. In Matthew the 16th chapter, Jesus is calling his disciples up to Caesarea Philippi. You can see that in Matthew 16, verse 13, where he says, "Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he was asking his disciples, 'Who do people say that I am?' And then he asked a second question, 'Who do you say I am?'" I'm going to point out this Sunday that the first thing you notice is the location. Jesus purposely chose Caesarea Philippi. And the reason he chose it was because at this location, in Jewish thought, the demons entered the world. There was this stream that went all the way down, an endless pool. I'll talk about that on Sunday. It wasn't that he just, we're in Caesarea Philippi, let me ask these questions. No, he went there for a purpose. And the fact that he says the gates of hell or Hades shall not prevail against it is very, very important. So we're going to look Sunday, the first thing, at the location. We're looking at, I should have gone back and said, we're going to first look at the origination of the church, and we're going to look at the location where the origination or the prediction of the church came about. Jesus then asks these two questions, and Peter comes up with a confession. He says, "Well, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." That is his confession that he gives, and I'll point out very, very briefly 5 things about this confession. You see, Jesus predicted the church. He says, "I will build my church." Now, the word church, ecclesia, means it's 2 Greek words, ek and kaleo, that is to be called out of. And that's what the church is. And I think that's one of the reasons we struggle with it online, because God has called us out, not only of the world, but our respective homes, to come together. That's why the writer of Hebrews says, "Let us not forsake our own assembling together." We are called out to be with each other, and we miss that. So we're going to be talking about the church, the location of where the prediction and Peter's confession, and then the mission of the church and the ultimate destination of the church. We're going to go through those things. But then I'm going to give you 6 illustrations of the church, and all of these have to do with why we miss, why there's something a little off about doing church online. Again, online church is an oxymoron. We're meant to be together. Now, in fact, one commentator said there's 96 illustrations or metaphors or analogies for what the church is, but I'm just going to stay with 6 because we don't have all Sunday. The 6 that I'd like to point out to you this Sunday, and I'll just give them to you, I'm not going to reiterate, but I want you to begin thinking about them. You see, Jesus calls the church his body. Now, what is the significance of that? Why would he call it his body? Secondly, he calls the church his bride. What's the significance of calling the church his bride? Thirdly, he refers to the church as a family. And there's a great deal in the first century world that surrounds that idea of family. Family was paramount. And why in the world does Jesus call the church his family? Fourthly, it speaks of the church, Paul the Apostle does, of being a temple. And there is incredible significance for that. There were temples everywhere in the first century. Every city you went into had a temple. They were to pagan gods. And of course, that gets the idea of temple goes all the way back to the tabernacle and the temple, but it goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden was God's first temple. Now, if you look in Genesis, he says that he wanted Adam and Eve to spread this temple, this garden, throughout the entire earth. And isn't it interesting that the church has been given a global mission to spread the church throughout the entire universe? So it's a temple, but it's also a flock. It's a group of sheep, and they have shepherds. And that is so intimate, that idea of sheep and shepherd. And we're going to explore that Sunday. And finally, he calls the church, or not Jesus, but Paul, the pillar and support of truth. So 6 metaphors. The first metaphor that he talks about is that of a body, and then of a bride, then of a family, then of a temple, then of a flock, and then of a pillar. Each one of those have profound significance for what the church is. But each one of those give us a reason for why we miss doing church in person. You see, every one of those illustrations, there is a relational aspect to it, a bride and a groom. There is the aspect of a communal aspect, that is a temple, communing with God, being with each other, a family. And there's also this idea of not only a relational, a communal, but there's a personal aspect. So 3 things are central to those illustrations: relational, personal, and communal. And in order to do church, all those things really need to be present. As grateful as I am for online church, it's just not the same. And I'm going to make an announcement now. This decision made by the elders was not brought about hastily, overnight, but without much humble prayer, great thought, and biblical mandate. Because of that, we have decided that God would have us to start meeting again as a church in person on May the 31st. So we are going to resume church services in person on May the 31st. Now that's a significant day because May the 31st is called Pentecost Sunday. Now I must confess to you, as an evangelical, rarely did I ever take note or mention that Sunday, 50 days after the resurrection, was Pentecost Sunday. We just didn't celebrate it growing up in either the Baptist church or Bible churches that we're in. Some other churches do make a big deal out of it, but I never did. Now, I think it's significant that we've chosen that day, and part of that came from a video that a pastor in California did where he called upon his flock to resume meeting on Pentecost Sunday. Pentecost, of course, is when God formed the church, when the Holy Spirit came down and became a part of each and every life of every saint. It's also significant in that it was from that point on the church started going out and growing and sharing the gospel. So we are going to resume meeting on May the 31st, Pentecost Sunday. Now let me tell you, it's going to be different. We're going to have less seats. Every seat, we've reconfigured the auditorium so when you sit down as a family, you can sit next to each other. But then you will be 6 feet from the row in front of you and 6 feet from the row in back of you. If someone else comes in that's not a part of your immediate family, they can't sit next to you, we'll have to space 3 chairs in between your family and you. Or if 2 individuals that come in that don't know each other, there'll have to be a 3-seat separation. We're also going to provide face masks. We're also going to provide hand sanitizer. And we're going to maintain social distancing the whole time. So we're going to meet again, but we're going to meet under slightly different parameters. There will be no donuts, no coffee, no pads that are handed out. We'll sterilize everything in the building. We'll only have 1 restroom open, and it will be prepared and sterilized as well. In other words, as an essential business, we're going to go above and beyond what you might experience in King Soopers or what you might experience in Home Depot. We're going to be sure that we go above and beyond the CDC's guidelines. But we are going to meet. Now, because that means that we'll have be able to accommodate less people, we're going to send out and we're going to have a letter and a lot of information coming to you in the coming weeks explaining what we're doing it and how we're doing it. But one of the things we're going to do is to have a reservation system because we can't have everybody showing up. It just won't work. We do want to maintain social distancing. We want to have enough hand sanitizers, and we want to be sure that we're safe. Now, with that in mind, there are no safe places on this earth. We're going to do our best to make everything as hygienic as we can. But if you're in perhaps one of those high risk groups, 70 or above or whatever, we're going to invite you to stay home or we're going to invite you to come. I'm not going to tell you what to do. You have to make that decision. But if you stay home, we will still stream the message. If you decide to come, we will maintain social distancing. So, I'm going to ask that you begin praying for the leadership in our church, because on May the 31st, after almost 2.5 months of not assembling together, we're going to begin. Now, one final thing. We're not the only church that's doing this. I've been in touch with pastors in several different cities, and they too are going to begin meeting on May the 31st, Pentecost Sunday. So it's just not us on some wild expedition, but many other pastors. In fact, in California, where this movement began, 3,000 churches have agreed to meet on Pentecost Sunday. I'm hoping we'll have hundreds of churches that meet on Pentecost Sunday. So one final thing I must say to you. Online church is really an oxymoron. We're grateful for it, but it's time for the church, based upon our First Amendment rights and the free practice of our faith, to assemble together in one spot with one Lord. May the 31st, Pentecost Sunday. I look forward to seeing many of you all in person. May the Lord bless you. May He keep you. May His face shine upon you. And may He guide and direct all the churches in the Colorado area that are going to resume meeting on May the 31st. Not too many more Sundays, and we'll be together.